Hello and welcome in. It is Tuesday, November 26th, and I just walked off the set of the College Football Playoff Committee Ranking Show. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and I appreciate you guys being with us. We have a fun show in store for you tonight, just a quick playoff rankings reaction show. Then the good news for us here at Always College Football is that we had very limited time between basketball games between Memphis, Michigan State, and then Kansas. Kansas playing tonight. I forget against who. I probably should know that. I apologize. But I am all in on college football at the moment. Hoop season starts for me here pretty soon, but not there yet. We, however, have the third or fourth College Football Playoff Committee rankings tonight. And it's a relatively intriguing endeavor that we need to go through. We will start like we always do at the top. Number one, a couple of big takeaways from this week's committee. One, I'm honestly kind of amazed at how little attention they're paying to strength of schedule. And I don't necessarily have a huge problem with that, if I'm going to be completely honest. I've never been one that relies heavily on metrics. It's not really my thing. I'm more of an eye test guy, but I do acknowledge strength of record. I do acknowledge resume. And the thing that's always been most important for me, if I were sitting on the committee, the thing that I would value above all else is who you beat. Not necessarily who you lost to, but who you beat. That's always to me been the most important thing, because that indicates to me that at your best in a quote championship and or playoff setting, at your best in the biggest moments, are you capable of rising to the occasion? So that's what I've always valued. And this committee, and every committee is a little different. This committee looks at things a little differently than I might look at them, and that's okay. Let's start with Oregon. Oregon is in there at number one. I have no problem with that. They're the only remaining undefeated team in the FBS. They've beaten Ohio State. They're 3-0 against the top 40. I am great with what they've accomplished this year. No problems whatsoever. Their efficiency numbers, 4 on offense, 12 on defense, like they're awesome. They're a great football team, followed closely by Ohio State, who at number 2, I would have gotten a pretty good laugh out of it tonight. If the committee just would have kept us on our toes and put Ohio State at 1, that would have been funny, but they didn't. Obviously, they're not going to do that. But just, it's been kind of redundant in the top 4, so maybe just something to mix it up would have been unique. Of course, Oregon beat Ohio State. I'm not actually suggesting that they do that. I'm just talking out loud. Just as I sit there on the desk every Tuesday, it'd have been fun to have something to freak out about. Didn't have much to freak out about tonight, I might add. Texas sitting there at number 3. No problem there. Strength of schedule in the 36 range. 5-1 against the top 40. Their one loss coming to Georgia. Don't have a problem with where Texas is at right now. And we've started to have the conversation. If Texas were to lose this week to Texas A&M, would they free fall enough to fall out of the top 12? I don't think they can at this point. Even at 10-2, can you really justify dropping them below Clemson? Can you? I don't think you can, personally. And I look at Clemson's resume, and their best win at the moment is against a Pitt team that has lost 4 straight. So I don't think Texas is in a position where if they lose this week, they would fall out of the playoff. But if I'm Texas, I would much rather not leave it up to the mercy of the committee, because if you look at Texas's resume, it's just not very impressive. It's not entirely their fault. They tried to play quality non-conference game out of conference against Michigan, and it just didn't materialize. Michigan stinks. So it's not Texas's fault, but they haven't beaten anybody right now that is the real deal. Penn State is at number 4. Don't have any issues with Penn State being there right now. The Illinois win gets a little better this past week. They're now 8-3. They also have wins against 4 other bowl teams in USC, West Virginia, Washington, and Minnesota. So I think Penn State is fine. I think their schedule has strengthened a little bit down the stretch because of Illinois' resurgence, and that has been beneficial, of course, with Illinois being right there in at number 23. Let's go next to number 5, Notre Dame. If I'm Notre Dame, I'm doing cartwheels right now, because not only do I feel great about my current standing, they, aren't paying attention to my one fatal flaw. Their one fatal flaw is that their strength of schedule is worse than any team outside of Boise State that is currently ranked in the top 17. That is pretty wild to me. Notre Dame's strength of schedule currently at 78. Boise State has the worst. They're at 81. SMU is 77. But Notre Dame, no one's paying attention to the fact that they haven't really beaten a lot of great teams because some of the teams that Notre Dame was hanging their hat on have come back to earth just a little bit. Texas A&M has now lost a few games. Texas A&M now currently sitting there in a position where they're not looking that great, 8-3. It was looking a lot better when Texas A&M was 8-1 or 7-1 or whatever they were a couple weeks ago. But losing to South Carolina and then losing last week to Auburn, that hurts Notre Dame's resume. Louisville losing to Stanford, that hurts Notre Dame's resume. The good news is Notre Dame still has a win over Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech is now 7-4 as well. So while there are some impressive moments on this schedule collectively, it's not great. So the committee is kind of ignoring that, and Notre Dame's in a really good spot. They get a win this week against SC, which would be a tough game. They're probably going to host a playoff game. I don't see anyone right now that could theoretically jump them. Do you think Tennessee from the 8 spot could jump Notre Dame? Probably not. They're, of course, going to get pushed down because teams will lose in the conference championship game. And they can't get a first-round bye. So the best that Notre Dame can do is be number 5. Well, the Big Ten champ or the SEC champ is going to be 1. The Big Ten runner-up is probably going to be 5. So the best they can probably do is 6. Will the SEC loser be 6? Sure, then they're probably the best they can do is 7. But the good news is I don't think anyone else that will be in the running for that spot could jump them. So Notre Dame probably with a win this weekend secures a first-round home game, which is excellent. If you are the Irish, it's the best you can do in this current format. Help me understand this. Right now, Miami is sitting there at number 6. Georgia is sitting there at number 7. I think Miami has a really, really talented team, but I haven't seen it with great consistency this year. I look at their metrics, and while they're number 1 offensively, they're number 59 defensively. This is in unit offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency rankings. So I'm looking at this now, and then I'm also seeing their strength of schedule at 59. Georgia is at number 9 offense, number 10 defense, and number 1 strength of schedule. I would have probably had Georgia ahead of Miami. Are we splitting hairs? Maybe a little bit, but it's just one thing that I kind of noticed as I was going down to this strength of schedule rabbit hole that I think should be weighed a little heavier than it's currently being weighed by the committee. Tennessee is at number 8. They're in prime position after the losses all around them. Is Tennessee a national championship contender at the moment? I don't see them that way. But by a process of elimination, because of the way other teams have played, Tennessee went from being on the outside looking in to now the inside looking out because of the loss to loss by Bama and the loss by Ole Miss. So Tennessee in prime position to secure a playoff spot and a heavy favorite, a healthy favorite this weekend against Vandy. So Tennessee punched their ticket with a road win against the Vanderbilt Commodores. Let's go next to number 9, SMU. Here's where I think it's going to get very interesting because SMU is sitting there as 77 strength of schedule. And SMU plays Cal this weekend. They won't strengthen their strength of schedule. SMU's one loss came before they made a quarterback change. And I know the committee is acknowledging that. They've watched the tape. Surely they have. SMU, I think, is a really good football team. I got tons of respect for them. I think they got a lot of speed. Their best win right now against Duke at 8-3. Louisville is 7-4. They beat Pitt. And they also beat TCU. So they have a handful of wins against teams with 7 or more wins. So I think SMU's in really good shape. But I do wonder if Miami really any of the ACC teams. So let's say SMU wins this weekend. SMU's already going to the ACC championship game. We already know that. They've already locked up a spot. But if SMU loses this weekend, that would open up the door for the SEC teams that are currently on the outside, meaning Alabama. So if Cal beats SMU, Alabama would be the next team up, assuming they beat Auburn. So Alabama could secure a spot if SMU were to lose, because then you would have to draw the assumption if Miami lost to SMU, then Miami would be 11-2. SMU in that scenario would be 11-2, and they'd be measured against the 9-3 Alabama. Where would the committee go in that scenario? I don't know the answer to that. I just am curious if that's a conversation that will be had there in Grapevine, Texas. So I think SMU's in prime position to lock down a spot if they win this week. But I'm just telling you right now, I would not want to be the ACC championship game loser. I'm just saying that out loud so we can get out in front of it, because we've seen the committee do things in the past. This is a different committee. Obviously, we've seen them do things in the past where at the end they make a big adjustment and they say, well, eye test over resume, better versus more deserving, all this other stuff. I would rather control my own destiny if I were the ACC, and I would not want to be measured against a 3-loss SEC team when the strength of schedule metrics are this much in the SEC's favor. That's all I'm saying. It's just something worth acknowledging, at least at the moment. Indiana has dropped now to 10. Their efficiency rankings remain really solid. Number 3 on offense, number 25 on defense. The strength of schedule, a significant boost from last week. They were 106 last week. Well, they go on the road to Columbus, and they now move all the way up to number 51. I think Indiana's in with a win this weekend against Purdue. They're currently 1-1 against the top 40. So I'm not sure where the other team would be in the top 40, or if they're factoring in some type of FPI. Would it be Washington? Would it be Michigan? The reality is the combined total of record of the teams that Indiana's beat this year is 42 and 57. But while they haven't played quality competition, the committee, by the way, has already acknowledged that strength of schedule doesn't matter based on how things have gone up to this point. But if you look at game control, you look at strength of record, you look at how they've performed by just watching the tape outside of the Ohio State game, they've looked very, very solid. So several teams have had multiple off nights. Indiana's had one. That one was a hard one to forget, but I think they're justifiably in right now with a win this weekend. Boise State sitting there at 10-1. I don't have a problem with Boise being the highest G5 team. I think there should be a debate between them and Tulane if Tulane can finish the deal and win the American Athletic Conference. Because if I look at Tulane, their only losses are against P4 teams, against Oklahoma, and then they lost to Kansas State. So I think there should be maybe a discussion there when taking everything into account, but I don't know if there will be, because Tulane's strength of schedule is not great. Meanwhile, Boise's is pretty good. Their only loss is against Clemson. So I think Boise's in full control of their own destiny. It's just a matter of whether or not right now they get that first round bye. Clemson in there at number 12. Talked about them already a little bit. I think they're kind of there by a process of elimination. I don't have a huge issue with it, but they have one win against a team that's currently above 500. That team is Pitt. So Clemson being in at 12 is fine, but I do think a win this weekend against South Carolina would go a long way and towards changing people's perception on what Clemson is this year. It's been hard for me to forget the performances against Louisville and Georgia. I, as someone that has watched those games, have studied that tape, was on the call for the Georgia game, I, as someone that watched that, acknowledge that there's a pretty big gap between Clemson and some of the teams up there on the line of scrimmage in some cases. I don't think Clemson's what they once were, and that's okay, but I will be curious if they can win this weekend against a team that right now is universally respected in South Carolina. That will help an awful lot in justifying this current ranking of number 12. It might even just give them enough to push them up into the field, depending on what happens in front of them. Alabama's at 13, a justifiable slide based on the performance they had this past weekend against Oklahoma. But I think Alabama's actually has more life than maybe I originally thought. When I first watched Alabama and watched the performance this weekend, it would be hard to feel good about their candidacy. But you look at the strength of schedule, they're still 11. You look at the strength of record and the FPI and all these other metrics that would support where they're at. They're still in a pretty decent spot, all things considered. Looking at their combined record of the teams they've beaten is 50-27. So still very strong strength of schedule. But I do think Alabama needs a lot of help. I think they need Cal to beat SMU. I think they need Georgia Tech to maybe beat Georgia. I think they need Vandy to beat Tennessee. I think they need USC to beat Notre Dame. I think they need South Carolina to beat Clemson. Not only would the South Carolina remove Clemson from the picture, but that would strengthen Alabama's resume, because currently Alabama's second best win. South Carolina sits there at 8-3 and currently ranked number 15 in the CFP. So that would be really helpful for Bama. I think they can get in. I just think they need some help. But how much help do they need? I think they need two upsets this weekend. And the narrowest margin of the teams in front of them, that is, they need two upsets this weekend. So Clemson, a 2.5-point favorite against South Carolina. If South Carolina beats Clemson, that will obviously help Bama. And then they need Cal to beat Cal to beat SMU. They're about a 13.5-point dog right now. Then they need USC to beat Notre Dame. They're about a 7.5-point dog at home. So I think they need 2 upsets. If they can get 2 upsets, they got a fighting chance. The other thing that could happen is if Texas A&M beats Texas, would Texas fall all the way out? I don't know if it would happen, but it might be something worth monitoring. But I think 2 upsets for Bama gets them in. 3 upsets for Ole Miss gets them in, even though I don't know if that's likely, because I could see a scenario where Ole Miss is wedged out by another team that is currently sitting behind them because of who they lost to. But I don't know. I think Ole Miss is still a really good football team, and if they're using the eye test the way they've used the eye test for other teams, you see Ole Miss at their best, and I think they're still an extremely dangerous outfit. South Carolina, perfectly placed, I think, at 15. I don't think there's any way they can pass 2 teams that beat them and route to the college football playoff. Arizona State appropriately ranked at 16. I'm curious now, too, because you look at how many Big 12 teams are in the rest of these rankings. Between 16 and 24, there are a bunch of Big 12 teams. You have Arizona State at 16. You have Iowa State at 18. You have BYU at 19. You have Kansas State at 24, and you have Colorado at 25. So you have 5 Big 12 teams between 16 and 25. Will that be enough for Arizona State to, say, go and beat Arizona this weekend and then beat the 18th ranked Iowa State Cyclones in the Big 12 championship game? Will that be enough to vault them past Arizona or vault them past Boise State? That's a conversation I'm really curious about, because I think right now Boise State's in prime position to get that first round bye. But man, that's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to swallow when you take into account the strength of schedule that they played when compared to some of these other teams. Another team that I'll be watching closely, A&M's got a pretty clear path. A&M, they went out, they're in. They got to win the Big 12, I don't know why. I'm tired tonight, obviously, right? I'm all over the place. A&M's got to beat Texas this weekend. They got to win the SEC. That will obviously get them into the field. The other thing that was brought up and brought to our attention tonight that is interesting, just worth noting, Tulane is the current format of the college football playoff states that the top 5 highest ranked conference champions are guaranteed a spot in the college football playoff. So the highest ranked conference champions, the 5 highest ranked conference champions. Well, just something to bring to your attention. Right now, Tulane represents the American. Tulane has to win this weekend, and Tulane would have to beat Army in the American Athletic Championship. But let's just say the winner of the Big 12 is, say, BYU, who is currently 19. Well, Tulane is 17. So there is a possibility, unlikely possibility, because the Big 12 champion is probably going to beat a ranked Big 12 team in the conference championship game. So it's unlikely that Tulane would be able to hold off that Big 12 champion, but there is a possibility that the 5 highest ranked conference champions come from the Big 10, the SEC, the ACC, the Mountain West in Boise State, and the American Athletic Conference in Tulane. There is a possibility, especially knowing right now that Tulane is ranked ahead of a possible Big 12 conference championship game participant. So depending on who gets in, whether it's Iowa State, BYU, Tulane's ahead of both those teams. So worth noting for sure. Tulane also lost to a team that's ranked 24th right now in Kansas State. So a little bit messed up in this part of the bracket, but there's going to be contradictions at this point too when you get 17, 18, 19, 20 through 25. Am I good with Missouri? Yeah, they're 8-3. It's at this point, who else are you going to put in there? I'm looking at other teams that could maybe make a case at being in 21 through 25. I'm okay with Missouri. I'm okay with Illinois. I'm okay with UNLV. Can you justify putting a Louisville in there? I don't think so. Can you justify putting an LSU in there? Probably not. So I'm okay with And can you justify keeping an Army team in? No, absolutely not. They shouldn't have been in last week. So I'm okay with the rankings as it sits right now. The one thing that I have an issue with, and I've already kind of said it, and I'll put a bow on this conversation tonight, with all the seemingly the inconsistent scheduling that we have. For instance, like we have massive conferences, 18-team conferences, 16-team conferences. It's impossible to play a conference schedule that is equitable across the board. Some teams are going to get really, really tough draws, and some teams are going to get easy paths. And back in the day, it didn't really matter, because if you came out of the Big Ten West, or if you came out of the SEC East, or you came out of the Pac-12 North, it didn't really matter because you still had to beat the SEC West champion, or the Big Ten East champion, or the Pac-12 South champion to be crowned a conference champion. Well, now you don't have to play that big bad bully at the end of the level. You can navigate through and maybe avoid all these different difficult teams. You play one tough team, you get your doors blown off, you still find your way in the college football playoff. So I thought the committee, and I clearly have made a mistake in my assessment, I thought the committee would weigh strength of schedule more heavily this year because of how inconsistent conference schedules are across the board. That was a mistake. They don't put as much stake into that as I thought they would. But I do think that creates a slightly slippery slope. That's all I'm saying. Because strength of schedule, if they're going to put a lot of stock on strength of schedule, then, and you're going to reward teams for having played a really difficult strength of schedule, then that incentivizes teams to strengthen their schedules. But if you are not going to punish teams for having a weak strength of schedule, then what's to stop some of these teams like Indiana from playing Charlotte, FIU, and a FCS school in their non-conference? There's not. So I do think that is a slightly slippery slope, because we have been told forever that the harder the schedule you play, the more you're likely to be rewarded, regardless of whether or not you win all those games. Even if you lose them close, we acknowledge that you played them and you're going to get the benefit of the doubt. That's not the case as much this year. So I wonder if that will have an impact on how teams schedule in the future and whether or not it adjusts from year to year, given the way things have gone this year. Let's just also acknowledge the fact that there have been a ton of teams that have been well positioned that have played their way out of the playoff. Am I wrong? Like, how many teams this year have been in incredible position only to blow it? A bunch, right? And that's kind of what we thought when things expanded to the 12-team playoff. We thought some of the best teams, some of the biggest brands, they would have to kind of screw it up to be left out. Well, that's happened in a few different scenarios this year. Alabama has been in prime position multiple times this year to lock down a playoff spot, but you know what they've done? They've screwed it up. Ole Miss, the same thing. So I think it's going to be a fascinating thing to see how this all works out. To be honest with you, though, I think there are fewer national championship contenders this year than there's been in quite some time. I'm really starting to believe that this is a very top-heavy bracket. And there might be teams that find their footing, and maybe Miami gets hot, Cam Ward gets hot, maybe SMU gets hot, who knows? But this is a very top-heavy bracket. So while the playoff has expanded, I almost feel like the amount of national championship contenders, it's fewer than it's been in years past. So something worth monitoring as well. We'll be back tomorrow. We will do our previews for the college football weekend coming up this weekend. Rivalry weekend, our favorite weekend of the year. We hope you're as excited as we are. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, who, by the way, graced us with his appearance tonight. We are very grateful to the other Jack for showing up. Ohio State on the heels of a massive win against top 5 Indiana. So it's nice when Ohio State wins the game and the other Jack comes out of the woodwork. So we very much appreciate his presence tonight as well. For all of us, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.